The political crisis in Niger is deepening as France now is evacuating its citizens from the capital, and the effects are being felt well beyond the West African nation's borders. The international community are now taking entrenched positions, trading threats of intervention, sanctions and even war. France, Italy and Spain, as I say, are now getting their citizens from the country. And so, what have you got? On the one side, those that want the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, reinstated. That includes the West African bloc, the ECOWAS, the EU, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The military junta, called the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, has found support in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner mercenary group, has welcomed the coup and said that he can help. And the Kremlin has held back on fully fledged support, only urging the restoration of the rule of law. Two sides to the story to cover today. Larry Madowo is in Nairobi. Jim Bitterman is in Paris. I'm going to start with you, Jim, on the announcement that the French are evacuating their citizens from the capital. I'm guessing not only for their own safety in terms of violence, but also they just don't, the last thing they would want would be any of their diplomats or troops or citizens taken hostage.
That's absolutely right, Richard. I think what they saw was that riot that took place on Sunday when protesters attacked the French embassy, and that was the beginning of things. And then we've been told that, in fact, they've been looking at the harsh rhetoric that's been coming down from the junta and the number of arrests that are taking place. And all of it's casting some doubt on exactly what the intentions of the military men that have taken control, what those intentions are. So they've started these evacuation flights. It started about midday French time today. There have been about 600 French that have applied to get on the flights. No, they're not obligating anybody to leave. There's about 1,200 French in the country. And they've also, because of their commitments with the other European neighbors, they're also going to be evacuating people from other countries, Germany, for example, and Spain and other countries that may want to go. But it's all on a voluntary basis. If people think that they can survive okay there with the new regime, then they probably will stay. But for the most part, I think there's a lot of nervousness on the ground and a lot of doubt of what the regime is planning.
Jim Bitterman, thank you. To Larry Madowo now. The battle lines are pretty clear-cut now. On the one hand, you have the junta backed by these maybe four other countries, and yet ECOWAS says force will be used. Everybody is now in a position that will be very difficult to row back if the elected president is not reinstated.
Fighting words, Richard, from the military junta that already said it was ready when ECOWAS first threatened force on Sunday, and overnight getting huge support from the two immediate neighbors, Burkina Faso and Mali, that are also ruled by the military, who said any military intervention in Niger would be a direct act of war against them. And then also Guinea, which also ruled by the military, saying they will not be enforcing the ECOWAS sanctions announced by the West African bloc, and using a word that we hear all too commonly, sovereignty. I want to play for you the statement from these three countries that appear to have been coordinated. They all came out around the same time. And it starts with the Malian Prime Minister saying this warning 3 times.
Avertissent que toute intervention militaire
warn that any military intervention against Niger would amount to a declaration of war against Burkina Faso and Mali.
Gouvernement de transition du Burkina Faso.
The transitional governments of Burkina Faso and Mali invite the living forces to be ready and mobilized, to lend a hand to the people of Niger in these dark hours of Pan-Africanism.
The brotherly peoples of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea aspire to more recognition and respect for their sovereignty.
The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, now has 5 days to decide if they will in fact use force to reinstate President Mohamed Bazoum, because the military junta in Niger does not appear keen to go back to the barracks and allow the democratically elected president to continue governing the country. And what these other countries are saying, especially Burkina Faso and Mali, is that if these West Africans were to invade Niger, they will send troops to them to defend them. So it would be all these 4 countries that are ruled by militaries who have all had coups since 2020 against a combined force of West Africans, or maybe the African Union is stepping in as well. if this does go down into military confrontation, it risks destabilizing the entire region. That this is the last thing it needs. It already suffers major attacks from armed groups affiliated to ISIS and to Al Qaeda. Richard.
Larry and Jim, thank you. Thank you both. The United States is hoping the situation can be turned round. The State Department has not yet formally classified the takeover as a coup, because that's a move that would force it to cut financial and military support to the Nigerian government and potentially leave the region open to more instability. US troops in Niger have been ordered back to base. I'm joined by Vedant Patel, the principal deputy spokesperson for the US Department of State. Thank you, sir, for joining me. Look, let's be clear, let's be blunt. It looks like a coup, sounds like a coup, walks like a coup. Why aren't you calling it a coup?
First of all, Richard, thanks so much for having me. And ultimately, this continues to be an incredibly fluid situation. Look, President Bazoum has not resigned. He continues to be the constitutionally elected leader of the government of Niger, and we're going to continue to consult closely with regional partners and entities, including ECOWAS, which has shown immense leadership in calling for the release of President Bazoum and his family, a call that we are going to continue to echo, and we'll continue to assess and monitor the situation closely.
Yes, but at the same time, I know my first question is somewhat disingenuous because I know the practicalities of calling it a coup. But the reality is you now have ECOWAS saying that they'll use force. You have Niger and these other countries saying, do that and we will consider it an act of war. This is a situation I don't see where you're moving on this. I don't see what you're hoping to gain by not having a stronger, more robust response.
Our hope and our goal here has been unambiguous, Richard. We have been incredibly clear since the early hours of this incident unfolding, and we've been unambiguous in our call that President Bazoum and his family needs to be released, and there needs to be recognition of the constitutionally elected government and leader of Niger, and there needs to be a return to constitutional order and law and order as well. And that continues to be the goals that we're working towards, not just directly in our engagements with President Bazoum and other officials of the democratically elected government of Niger, but also in our conversations with ECOWAS, the African Union, and other important partners.
Okay, let's try this a different way. At what point will you need to take a more muscular response? Because so far you're sort of going, the US seems to be going, we're hoping to be able to restore, we're hoping this will happen. But at some point, at what point are you going to put teeth behind it?
Well, we're certainly not going to prescribe any metric or moment in time from here. The important thing for us is that is a couple things. One, we're going to continue to work with regional partners like ECOWAS. Two, we're going to continue to engage directly with our embassy, our personnel, and our diplomats in Niamey, where we continue to have full accountability, which is continuing to operate normally today. And we're going to continue to call for the release of President Bazoum and the return to constitutional order. This continues to be an incredibly fluid and dynamic situation, and we'll continue to observe and engage on this from all angles.
The intention as it relates to the US troops, there's about 1,000 or 1,200 or so that are doing valuable anti-terrorist work in the country. Is there any intention at the moment? I mean, the intention is to keep them there, not to evacuate the base.
Well, certainly I would let my colleagues at the Department of Defense speak to anything about troop posture or anything like that. I will just say broadly that, of course, Niger is an important partner when it comes to security cooperation, specifically as it relates to counterterrorism efforts. But what I can say is, speaking to our diplomatic facility, our embassy in Niamey, we continue to have full accountability there. We continue to be operating there normally additionally, we continue to engage with American citizens who happen to be living or residing in the country and are communicating with them about safety efforts and advice as it relates to movements in impacted area. The important thing to remember here is that Niamey continues to be relatively calm. And there continues to be no targeted targets of American citizens or American facilities at this time.